Do il benvenuto al Castello del Valentino a tutti voi, in particolare a coloro che non sono di casa qui e quindi sono venuti appositamente per queste 2 giornate organizzate dal Dipartimento Interateneo di Scienze, Progetto e Politiche del Territorio, il DIST cosiddetto, che ha appunto organizzato queste 2 giornate sul tema Città del Desiderio. E proprio di desiderio vogliamo parlare questa sera col nostro ospite, Tino Sehgal, insieme a 2 colleghi del DIST, Giovanni Semi, sociologo urbano, e Gianmaria Ajani, giurista e anche esperto di diritto dell'arte. Per cominciare, chi di voi è passato attraverso il cortile ha visto un'opera di Tino, ha avuto la possibilità di fruire di una delle opere d'arte di Tino Sehgal, e i più fortunati di voi hanno anche ricevuto una storia. Che è una, secondo me, delle esperienze più emozionanti, più toccanti dell'esperienza di quest'opera. Allora io partirei dalla mia storia, che è come siamo arrivati qui ad avere Tino Sehgal. La storia comincia nel 2005, quando ho visto per la prima volta un'opera di Tino Sehgal alla Biennale di Venezia. Tino è stato il più giovane artista a rappresentare la Germania alla Biennale di Venezia, il padiglione appunto della Germania. Allora l'opera si chiamava This is so contemporary, ehm, e, consisteva nelle guardie del padiglione che saltellavano di qua e di là per il padiglione cantando This is so contemporary, contemporary. Non so se qualcuno di voi l'ha vissuta, io ero lì e sono rimasta piuttosto sorpresa, come molti altri visitatori. Da allora è passato del tempo, fino a quando Tino ha fatto una carriera fulminante. Nel 2013 ha vinto il Leone d'Oro alla Biennale di Venezia. Nel 2018 mi telefona una vecchia amica di infanzia, Cora Gianolla, che è assistente e producer di Tino, dicendo: stiamo portando un'opera di Tino Sehgal alle OGR, abbiamo bisogno di trovare degli interpreti per la sua opera, molti interpreti, 60-70 persone comuni. E quindi mi chiede una mano per passare parola e per trovare le persone che possono appunto mettere in atto l'opera di Tino. E non solo mi chiede una mano a trovare altre persone, ma mi coinvolge come interprete dell'opera, ovviamente in modo così un po' roccambolesco, cambio cappello e divento anche io interprete di un'opera di Tino Sehgal. La stessa opera che appunto avete avuto modo di vedere oggi qui nel cortile del castello. Ovviamente per me, come per tutti gli altri interpreti che vedo anche qui seduti, è stata un'esperienza molto intensa, e quindi quando all'interno del DIST qualche mese fa il nostro dipartimento è stata lanciata una call dicendoci: chi vorreste invitare a parlare di desiderio, di città del desiderio, di città future? Volate alto, ci è stato detto, pensate alla persona senza vincoli economici, senza vincoli di fattibilità che vorreste avere qui con voi. E il mio pensiero è andato a Tino Sehgal, ovviamente pensando che non sarebbe mai veramente successo, e poi invece le cose succedono. Devo dire grazie moltissime anche a Cora, appunto Gianolla, e a Tino, che hanno accolto questo invito un po' fuori dai canoni per loro, anche perché le opere di Tino solitamente, in quanto opere d'arte visiva, vengono esposte per un periodo di tempo prolungato, come sta una mostra in un'istituzione culturale, quindi per un minimo di 6 settimane, tranne casi eccezionali. Quest'opera infatti è passata poi anche in Piazza Maggiore a Bologna ed è stata poi riprodotta qui oggi. Ma detto questo, chi è Tino? Per chi non lo sa, immagino tutti voi lo sappiano, e perché è qui oggi. Tino appunto è un artista di arte visiva. Le sue opere sono state esposte nelle più grandi, nelle più importanti istituzioni culturali a livello internazionale, a partire dal Guggenheim di New York, la Tate Modern di Londra, il Palais di Tokyo a Parigi, e quindi una delle voci più autorevoli nel campo appunto dell'arte contemporanea. Perché abbiamo deciso di invitarlo qui? Perché abbiamo pensato che in un dialogo relativo alla città del desiderio non potesse mancare la voce dell'artista. e quindi la voce di colui che sa interpretare la realtà con una chiave che è allo stesso tempo poetica e critica, come sa essere quella appunto dell'arte. E quindi eccoci qui, Tino ha realizzato il mio desiderio di una conversazione insieme a lui, insieme ai nostri colleghi e a tutti voi, e partirei da una domanda molto molto semplice e molto molto ampia e difficile allo stesso tempo, che è quella centrale del nostro manifesto di Urban Desire. Quindi let me switch to English. I hope that everyone will understand. Tino, first of all, of course, thank you for being here. I will start with a very broad and general question, which recalls our manifesto of Urban Desire, which is, in which city of the past, present, or future would you like to live and why?
I mean, definitely an Italian city. but a smaller Italian city of the past. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Is that enough? Thank you for the invitation also, Sarah, and thank you for this nice introduction. I realized, like, when you speak Italian, I can understand what you're saying. So if you want to also speak in Italian, then maybe I can speak in English. We can try. If I don't understand, I can tell you. Then maybe it's nicer for the people here.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big question. No?
Yeah.
I think that I think at the moment with life in general, let's say in the 21st century, and then cities are a part of this, we have two big problems which are somehow related. One is the problem of quantity, and the other one is the problem of freedom, separation. You know, like, so both are related to modernity, and so maybe I can try to explain this, because it's going to doesn't make maybe sense immediately. But I think the problem of quantity is that we have so many billions of people on this planet now, and also in the cities we have much more. If you look at the development of, everybody knows this, but nonetheless, it's fascinating to look at it. If you look at what was the population in the up to the 18th century or something, and then it goes like this, you know. So basically what we're doing here in the 20th century, 21st century is a big social experiment. How can humans live together in larger numbers, vastly larger numbers than ever before? So like every experiment, you don't really know, you know, how it's going to come out, you know? And so I think this problem of quantity is a little bit under appreciated. And then I think, I want to ask also Giovanni, our sociologist, like, if you had to say to your son, you know, like, there he is, like, if you have to explain, and maybe not now he's 11, maybe when he's 17 or 18, if you to explain, because sociology exists only since modernity, no? If you have to explain, like, in 2 sentences, what is the core, as I know it's a difficult question, so maybe you don't need to answer. Sorry to put, yeah, exactly. Gianmaria, we can hear the law version of the question. What would you say is the core aspect of modernity? What is the core movement of modernity? What would you tell him in 6 years?
Come avete visto, questa cosa non è preparata, perché altrimenti non sarebbe mai successa una cosa. Well, again, I think the very issue of connectivity, of staying togetherness of people through environments, infrastructure, that's the main answer. That's what happened in the last 2 centuries. And that's the big interrogation, that's the big question, the question mark for our future. How keep on being together in a world that is vastly overpopulated?
That was more than
well. Never ask a sociologist to be concise. Never.
let's try Gianmaria.
So the question is, what is the specific
You have to explain
trait,
to him in 6
trait
years.
of modernity?
Yeah. What would it's the core trait? Yeah.
Yes.
Somebody else can also answer.
It's hyperconnectivity.
Okay, that's one word. That's
2 words.
2 words. Yeah.
Hyperconnectivity.
No, I would say the opposite. So I would say that like modernity, like which somehow also started in Italy, started in different places, but also started here, is first of all an experiment in, that's why I said earlier, freedom or separation. For me, both words sound very different, but mean the same. Yeah, so freedom and separation is the same thing, because every movement, every freedom-seeking movement is always a freedom from something. It's always I detach, I separate from something. Yeah, so let's say I come, from my father's side, from an Indian family. So there they have arranged marriages. So I have the freedom from this rigid bond of arranging a marriage. Or in Western societies, marriage was a very rigid bond. Now we can have more freedom because we can dissolve this bond, we can divorce, And any modern movement, social movement, you can see as a freedom from some rigid bond, freedom like emancipation, separation, freedom is all synonymous in my opinion. I emancipate from a certain gender role. Oh, I emancipate, this is where we are now, from the biological given of my body. I can emancipate, I can separate myself from from what biologically was kind of presupposed, let's say, These are all quintessentially modern movements. And and what's interesting for me in Italy is that, like, I feel in Italy, the family is the most unmodern thing, unmodern thing, because family is all about like connections which are very difficult to break free from. So for whatever reason, Italy kept a strong relation, more than France or Germany or England, to the family. I remember like when I started working in 2003 in Italy, and then at that time there weren't really mobile phones. I would always go to the public phone, and then I had this like this card, and I would call people on their landline, and always the mother would pick up, but I could never understand. Like for me, coming from Germany, why is the mother picking up? And I realized like people like maybe not Nicoletta, but other people in Venice at that time, they're still living with their mother in their 30s, So the importance of the family and of tradition, maybe because you have a strong tradition, was stronger than in the more northern countries of Europe, So that's why I think I would say tradition, family is rootedness, So freedom is breaking away. It's like going into the air. It's like you can say wings is like flying, and tradition, so the opposite of modernity, is rootedness, is connection. So when you're rooted, you can't really fly. A plant has no freedom to move, for example. Yeah, a plant is rooted. It means it's also a bit stuck, but it's very also plants are happy at the place where they are at. So I think the problem we have nowadays, and that's why I'd like to stay in the Italian small city of the past, is that like today we have had less in Italy, but especially in the countries of the north, we've had a kind of culture and emphasis on freedom. And freedom has been seen as like, and when you say the word freedom, it's almost like difficult even for me to be critical. Difficult to be critical of freedom. Now let's try to be critical of freedom in your mind. I give you 10 seconds. Try to find something critical about freedom. I wouldn't dare to say this in northern countries, but in Italy I dare to say this. So freedom, like I said earlier, but I'm going to repeat, is always de-rooting, is always separating from your roots. So in a culture which is kind of one-sided emphasis on freedom, on separation, at some point you end up, which we have in, for example, in the UK, you end up with a ministry for loneliness. It's not, I'm not saying this as a polemic, you know. I'm really saying this as like that, the end of the modern process of individualization, which, you know, sociologists, especially German sociologists, you know, will, you know, describe very well how we understand ourselves more and more as individuals, you know, like in other centuries, you understand yourself as Italian or belonging to a certain family. Today, you understand yourself as yourself. And then you, by choice, which is another freedom thing, another modern thing, by choice, you affiliate, you know, like, oh, I decide that I like electronic music, or I decide that I like to go to academic conferences, you know, but it's always a choice. You don't get born into like an aristocrat speaking in these rooms, you know, you do it by choice. So any movement of freedom is a derooting movement. And and any more people around me also make the connections with these people. The more people there are, the weaker the connection. Let's say if Gianmaria, you and me would spend the last 2 days with Giovanni and Sara and nobody else in a place on the countryside, we would know each other already much better. We would create a stronger bond, is my point, you know. Now we spend the time with a lot of different people, was also very nice, you know, but the bond we created was weaker than if we would have just spent the 4 of us 2 days locked in, you know. So the more people, the weaker the bond. This is not the problem of cities. Cities are places of freedom, which means cities are places of weak bonds. Means cities are places of derooting, but derooting, freedom, always the same thing. So I think the problem today is that like we've had too much derooting, too much individualization, too much, and this way it becomes difficult, so that they're filming this, but too much emphasis, let's put it like that, on the benefits of freedom. You know, it's a bit polemic, or even for me, like I say, it's difficult to say this sentence, because in a way I don't fully believe it, but at the end of the day, it's also true. It's like breaking free, like the nice Queen song. I want to break free. You know, like this is it. You break free. You break free. It's yeah. You break. You always break a connection. You know, and so so we like in the cities. I think a city of the future, like a city in Italy of the past, which are so beautiful. You know, like it will have to be a city where somehow we manage to root. And it's not only a place of freedom, but it's also a place of rooting. You know, I think the rooting is a conservative moment, you know, but it seems like in Italy, the balance is more there, but in other places less. Yeah. Was this the answer to it? Was a long answer to your question.
So I try to follow your line of reasoning. If I get your point, you're kind of quoting Georg Simmel. You're going back to this idea of this metropolis with people that are getting free by means of calculating all each other and using a means which he was not despising, but he was working on, which was money. And he was also, just like you, critically discussing the issue of objects and the continuous creation of objects as means of interaction among people. So one thing that one admires of your artwork, it's precisely the dissolving of the object. If you get to see Tino's artworks, you don't see any objects. You see relationships, you see bonding, you see people fleeing out of these relationships, but you don't see the objects, which is what is interesting to me. And in sociology, if you want to get back to my discipline, you are giving one of the brightest example of what is a public space. Who doesn't need any object, doesn't need a bench, doesn't need light, doesn't need even urban environment. But what makes a public space public? It's precisely the potentiality, the possibility of encounters, of relationships, which is what you do. Still, our cities are filled with objects, are not only with people, but this afternoon we talked about cars, bicycles, and then there's the built environment, which is even more creating anxiety against interactions. So what I was wondering is that, do you think your kind of artwork, it's something you might suggest to architects, urban designers, planners, saying defilling the city, creating void in the cities? I mean, do you think you can talk to architects, designers, and planners? Are you willing to?
I think there's two, I mean, there's two questions, you know, or like one statement, one question. I want to maybe first say something about what you said about money and objects, you know, also that people don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is, like, in a way, we have gone too far in these kind of emancipatory, separating, derooting, freedom, whatever you want to call them, like freedom and emancipatory are positive words, derooting, neutral, maybe separating, more negative, yeah? But they're all the same movement. This is my point. But my point is, like, it's about a balance, you know? So if you take, for example, money and objects, if you come from a more traditional, let's say, non-modern culture, it's very rigid culture, it's very unfree culture. So, and how do you create a more free culture? Let's say now if we go back to the times when this castle was built, you know, like money is a very key component. So like in that sense, you know, if we talk on this more theoretical level, like I think money is a very emancipatory medium, you know, because there's very little freedom if we are, let's say, in these times, you know, like I'm the servant, you are the Lord, or whatever, you know, I'm your husband, you're my, like whatever, you know, like these are very coded social relations, you know. So in these coded social relations, we have very little freedom. We know how to behave, we're educated how to behave, and there's very little people involved. Once money gets part of the game, money becomes more important, we don't relate directly. You sell something, I go there, like our relation weakens and freedom rises, you know? So, and it's the same with objects historically, you know? Like as long as we are in a very interpersonal society, like let's say traditional societies are very interpersonal, like they're based on interpersonal relations, then there's a little bit of agriculture, but there's very little circulation of money and goods. The more money and the more goods, the more anonymity, the more freedom, you know? Like, so also individualization only starts with money and objects, you know? So in that sense, so that people don't think don't get me wrong, like money and objects are key, you know, to creating freedom, to creating democracy. And I'm pro-freedom, I'm pro-democracy, no? Which doesn't seem evident in 2024, you know? So so that's why, like, I'm not like, I don't agree with this, like, you know, like, yes, there's an alienation which happens in the city, which is maybe what you described from Georg Simmel, but I think there's a lot of freedom which happens in the city. It's just a question of how much, you know? I think it's, and this is something that I'm always interested in my work. It's not, is it this or is it that, but how much of this and how much of that, you know? When I was young, one French curator said to me, and it really stuck with me, and I didn't understand at the time, but he said, like, oh, Tino, your work, il s'agit de règles et de réglages. So it means of rules and kind of, yeah, tuning, regulating, you know? And politically, this is also more where I stand. I don't believe in these big either ors. I believe more like in, let's say, networks, ecosystems, and their tuning, you know? Like, I think that's what you can also see in team sports. It's not like it's this or it's that. It's a lot about these kind of details, you know? So, and then the second question, let's say, or the question to come to that, so that objects, yes, money, yes, you know, like all good for freedom. It's just, and that's why also I like Italy, because I feel like Italy, not consciously, but that's why I like coming here, because Italy has a certain resistance against an overemphasizing of the market. You know, like, so for example, like Italy, I think you have strong, this sounds a bit, may sound a bit strange, but I'm trying to make like a serious argument with this. You have certain standards when it comes to food. And these standards cannot be broken by the market. Yeah. So it's like, no, like if it's going to cost more or if it's going to be less profitable, we don't care. Like the oil has to taste like this. The coffee has to taste like this. A pasta has to be al dente. Like, and where in the UK, like, and so certain things which come from the West and from the Northwest, they don't really enter here because don't make sense to you as a people, in my opinion, you know? And so I think this is for me, and it's not necessarily consciously done, but I think as somebody who studied political economy, I think the market is a great thing. Objects and goods are a great thing. Money is a great thing, but it's like how much of it, when and where, you know, like, and I think this is where also the big ideological conversations kind of fall short. They're more like a boxing match, which is entertaining to watch, but they're not really working on much, you know, because at the end of the day, it's all about this tuning, you know, and when exactly do you use how much of the market for a good life? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about, you know. And for example, I spend more time now in Spain, and I'm not an expert of Spain, so like it's maybe crazy, but Spain had this big unemployment. This is what we know in Germany. A lot of Spanish people came to Germany because they couldn't find work, you know. But when you come to Spain, there's a good vibe somehow. They all survive by helping each other through the families, family money. Again, I'm not an expert on this, but you realize somehow this country continued, and it's not in a bad place, you know, although the whole market aspect was a disaster, no? And probably if people know something about Spain, it's probably going to be easy to contradict me. But I'm just saying it's interesting for me, let's say sociologically, to look at cases where people kind of do this tuning, but maybe not conscious, no? And or where cultures do this tuning, where cultures have a different priority. Whereas, let's say, for example, in England, there's definitely a culture of the market. So, and also in the US, it's like you can feel it when you're there that kind of the market is their culture. And that's fine, but the question is, where does it end? You know, like, are they happy? You know, or where are they happy? You know, like, and why do they need a ministry for loneliness? You know, and I don't think in Italy you have a ministry for loneliness yet. Or you have one?
No.
Not yet. Yeah, but you're not creating ministry for loneliness quite yet. I mean, it's kind of a joke, but it's not, you know. Like I believe that these things are not, these things don't happen by chance in one place and not in the other, you know. So if I would work with architects or in the city, yes, I think that what I try to do, for example, in these associations is like create a work which can allow for a big number of people to interact with it, but nonetheless have a real kind of connection, which is kind of paradoxical. Because normally you only have a real connection in a kind of small numbered village-like place or in your family, but it's not really open. You know, I cannot just become part of your family. You're a really nice guy, but I'm not going to become part of your family, you know, like that's too much, you know, but I can maybe have an authentic conversation, you know, like in a certain moment. And is this would be an offer in the city? Yes, you know, and we don't like we don't talk to many companies, like if you say designers, architects or something, it happens on occasion, but I'd be happy to do it, you know. I think we have something to contribute, but it's up to other people to decide.
Listening to you now, I better understand why what you do in arts is named constructed situations. Perhaps I'm wrong, but the feeling I get is that there is an attempt to constructed situations. So construction means that there is a direction, there is a drive, there is a plan. Situations are some events, they occur, and situations normally are not planned. So to construct a situation means to put together what you were mentioning, a search for freedom in relationships, at the same time a conservation of roots. Now, trying to put that in the context of our discourse for these 2 days, which is about cities and people, I'd like you to tell us something about what you think in terms of cities being constructed situations, squares, piazza, being places where you can have constructed situations where the situation, the unplanned, is the random movement of people, and the construction is what has been set in place. This place, this castle, the parks. This is in a sense, it's a happy city because it was planned. Kings were living here and they used open spaces for hunting. That is why we have all these spaces. At the same time, later on, we had the automobile plants, meaning that incoming people were lodged in constructed situation where the quality of good was not so good. So the point is, how much do you think that the space for freedom that we can get in a city is somehow hampered? There are obstacles. There is a path dependence, which go a path dependence. So something economists say, path dependence. So we depend from the fact that somebody decided to have a park here, to have a factory there. We depend from the fact that a mayor 30 years ago decided to put asfalto, concrete all over the places, no more grass. So we depend from that. We have all this increase in the temperature because somebody decided years ago that we had to have parking lots for cars everywhere. So that is a space of lack of freedom for us. So how can we intervene in terms, and I'm closing with my long question, in terms of not only easing ties and connections among people, but breaking the path dependence, which is connected to monuments, to places, to squares, to parking lots, to general stores. So what is the place for finding freedom against all these buildings and bricks and rocks and whatever is solid?
Yeah, I mean, again, I want to say two things to what you said. I mean, once about this kind of situation, I think every situation is constructed. Every situation is planned, if you so wish. The difference to my work is that, like, I constructed it. And, like, for example, this situation is constructed mostly by convention, you know? So there's, like, and this, everybody in this room has learned the rules of listening to a talk, you know? So we know how to behave on the panel, you know? And then everybody knows that while we are speaking, they have to be silent because they're sitting opposite of us. You don't pick your nose. If you do it, you do it quickly. You know, like if you start now asking a question in the middle, it's maybe okay, maybe not. If you start screaming around, then you're kind of interrupting the thing and making yourself the center of the thing. All this is clear to 100% of the people in the room. And by the fact of saying, like, now it's a panel conversation, it's a conference, everybody is following the rules of this situation, you know? And somebody who cannot follow these rules will in some way be on the outskirts of human society, you know? And so just to say, like, I think any situation is constructed just mostly by traditional conventions, you know? Then about the city, I think that, I mean, one thing which I'm not an expert on, but which you mentioned, which is and comes to something which I know more about, is this thing of asphalt, you know, like that that somehow, like, it's not that long ago that we had this idea that, like, a city should be covered. Yeah. But somehow, and for many reasons, that's not good, you know. And also, let's say, if I allow myself to ask you the question I asked you, what is one of the main principles of modernity? I would say that, like, the principle of modernity, which you also have in exhibitions, is always moving on, let's say. Yeah? So that I'm a great fan or admirer of the German sociologist Gerhard Schulze, and he said this incredible thing. He said, like, modernity, or, like, let's say, modern market societies or modern markets can integrate anything. Anything can be integrated, you know? Like, and this we have, anything can be recuperated, if you want to say it in a more left-leaning vocabulary, yeah? But the only thing which cannot be integrated into a modern market society is arrival. Yeah. Like arrival, like to arrive. How do you say this in Italian? Arrivare? Yeah. So this is Gerhard Schulze, not me. Yeah. Like, anything can be integrated as long as it helps to keep the whole thing rolling. Yeah. Like, one quick way of explaining also, let's say, modern kind of industrial, post-industrial markets is that it's like a hula hoop. You remember the hula hoop? The hula hoop can only stay because it's moving. Yeah, so this is a quick, so that I don't speak so long, you know, quick way to understand how the economy works. It has to keep on moving. As long, it doesn't matter if it's, you know, if it's now steel, you know, the production of steel, or a CD by Rage Against the Machine, it's all the same. All is a product which helps to keep, you remember Rage Against the Machine? No. Yeah. So it doesn't matter what it is, you know, like, it all keeps the thing running, yeah? All keeps the hula hoop. What do you call a hula hoop? Reifen. How do you say that? Like the ring, the thing, the plastic thing running. Yeah. But what Schulze says, the one thing which is not okay is when you say, I have arrived. I'm fine. I'm fine now. Then boom, the hula hoop falls down, and people don't know, like, wait, I need to change with you. I'm offering some good to exchange for your good, or via money to your good. I don't want to go too deep into this, but arrival is something which is like poison for market economies, but really essential for human beings. That again goes back to this thing of belonging, rootedness, family, you know? That's why Italy, in my opinion, is in a good place. I don't know if you think you're in a good place, but I think you're in a much better place than most places in the world. I mean, we love to come here. Like I said to my partner, we're going to Italy. It's not even a question if she's coming, you know? Like she's here, you know? Like, and so this thing of arriving is something which you've kept in Italy, but a lot of other cultures have let go of. And I think nonetheless the city, and this has something to do also with the asphalt, with plant life, I think the city, and that's the problem, let's say the ontological problem of cars or the ontological problem of bikes, you know, like that, like, because you were talking about this earlier from a talk, you know, like that the bike or the car are moments of moving on, passing through. I mean, I can ride the bike a little bit in a mode of arrival, which my kids made fun of me, like very slow. Like, but they are moments of going somewhere, you know, and not arriving here. It's always modernity is going somewhere else. Arrival is being here. You know? And so I think the city is more modern than not. I mean, you had cities in antiquity, but they are places of freedom, they are places of anonymity, they are places of going somewhere. Wait, I can answer that in a second, but I want to answer him. No, I think that we don't need more. The places of freedom are already there. I think we need places of arrival. The city quintessentially is a place of freedom. There's lots of options. You know, you can somehow, less in Italy, but in Berlin, you can be who you want to be. If you dress like nobody has ever dressed before in Berlin, you can do it. But why? Because you're anonymous, because nobody cares, because it's an urban environment. So I don't think we need more places of freedom in cities. We need more places of arrival. And we tend to arrive in places where there's plants and animals. No? Like, so I think one thing is what I think which will be a project for the 21st century, I'm not an expert, is to take away all this asphalt, like not all of it, but a lot of it. And also to rethink the city. That's why I think when I first went to Venice, it seemed to me like a kind of, and when I first went to Venice more than 20 years ago, it seemed to me like an antiquated place. Now when I come to Venice now, it seems like a contemporary place or a forward-looking. Because it's a city on a human scale. It's a city for the body, like for walking, you know, which we don't have. We have cities for cars or maybe a few cities for bikes. So it's much easier to arrive in a city for walking, you know, like, and so I think what we need in cities is less places of transit to make it really, in a way, if you want to polemicize, like less freedom, more arrival. Yeah.
Okay, just one. Okay, so let me go back to the Italian city of the past where you would like to live. I guess that in this city, technology didn't exist, right? The modern technology didn't exist. Good point, director. So also in your artwork, technology is, I would say, absent. Maybe you can deny this, but both in the way of producing the artwork and in the way of non-reproducing the artwork. So on the other hand, I would say that in the last decades, there is this fashion of the smart city and of technology, not only in our daily individual life, but also in planning the city, no? What do you think that it's the right tuning of technology, using the word that you just, and the metaphor that you just used before? Is there a role for technology in the city of today and the future? And what should be this role, if any?
I'm not against technology, you know, like what you could, but it's, I would say it like this, like I like to work with the most complex technology on the planet, which is you know, like a human being. So what I'm critical of is like the Western infatuation with technology. I think that like our culture is a little bit like a kind of teenager who is obsessed with gadgets, you know, like, but gadgets are gadgets. I think that at the end of the day, we're humans and we need a dressel. We need like meaningful experiences. And this, our level of complexity is here, and the level of the most advanced technology is here. So there will always be a gap. Like the technology cannot answer to our needs. It can help us in some rudimentary things, yes. Like, you know, it's great to get oriented in a city, to have a map, which you can, you know, like say where you want to go, and then you will go there. But it's not going to be meaningful. It's not going to add in a deep way to the quality of life. Like if somebody smiles to me, or somebody has like a meaningful conversation with me, you know? And so I think this is a little bit of a confusion, like a teenager's confusion, like it's, or like fireworks, like it's like, oh, it's fascinating, you know? It's fascinating technology, what it can do, but it's not an answer to human, to deep human needs. It can never, because it's not complex enough, you know? And maybe at some point it will become complex enough, but it's, in my opinion, it's far from that. So for me, that's why I'm not that interested in it, you know? And I think my only critique is that like it's overemphasized or overrated, you know? Like people think that, or like now it's maybe a bit less, but like when I was growing up, people think the answers will lie in technology. But I think that will take a long time. And what we have from technology is mainly a kind of acceleration, you know? But is this acceleration good for humans? No, it's not actually good. People are not made for this kind of acceleration necessarily. It's a stress. So yeah, that's my take on technology. I'm not against it, you know, but to me, it's not that interesting. This is also something that like one famous German philosopher said, you know, like the best way to deal with technology is not to be critical and not to be for it. It's just to be indifferent, you know, to be indifferent in a way, you know. And I thought that was very true. It's nothing wrong, but we don't have to make it bigger than it is, you know. But of course, economically, it's very important, because economically, it's the main thing. It's the main motor which keeps the hula hoop thing running in a way, you know. So.
It's almost 7. It's the weekend, so let's talk about desire. We'll start with a quote of a famous anthropologist, Arjuna Padurai, who wrote a marvelous essay on the capacity to aspire. And he was basically saying that, following his own work, field work on Mumbai slums, that the more complex the situation, and a slum, it's a very complex situation, the more people cannot aspire to something, because the burden of the present is so heavy on their backs that aspiring to something gets impossible. And one of the reasons why this essay became a very famous one is that everybody said, well, that's more general issue. it's hard to aspire nowadays, because it's very hard nowadays to think about ourselves in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And we're wondering, and one of the main topic of these 2 days for us was precisely taking the same stance towards desire. Are we still able to desiring relationships, futures, people, or again, the trap of speed, of acceleration, of again, our incapacity of staying put, just like you said, of arriving and saying, okay, I'm done, it's okay. Isn't that also the incapacity of desiring again? And what do you think about desire? I mean, is your artwork helping finding a way into desire, or it's evading the very problem of desiring futures?
I mean, I don't know this anthropologist, but I think that desire is something like an anthropological constant. I'm not sure that, but I think stress can dampen desire. No, somebody who's very, very stressed can have a dampened desire. But on the other hand, I think that it's something very difficult to get rid of. Like, people have an attraction to something, no matter what their situation is. But probably we have more depression in Western modern societies. Depression is kind of the absence of desire, no? Like, we have more of that than probably we ever had. I don't know if I have like I think there's definitely like a numbing, like numbing, which comes from too many options, no? Like I'm not sure if it's the absence of desire, but there's some point where, like, I think Eva Illus, she wrote a little bit about that, no? Like, I can't remember because many years ago, but like this kind of like stress which comes with options, you know? But I think that desire is something very difficult to get rid of in humans, you know? Like, I think humans always have desires, and I think people always have aspirations. That would be my impression, you know? But I think that, of course, the more uncomfortable, the more stressed the times are, the more the movements become a little bit more conservative. So for example, I grew up in Germany with this feeling of a kind of social security system, welfare system. And for me, I was very aspirational, also in this modern sense of wanting to break free from everything which was around my family and stuff like that. And now my kids, they're Generation Z, no, Gen Z. And all of my friends who have kids in that age, we see that they're very family oriented, much more than us, which is strange. We wanted to break free from our families, and they want to they stay in contact. And lots of my friends have kids in their 20s, 30s, they say like, oh, still around, still in contact, you know? And so that has maybe something to do with your question, like the more options there are, the more unstable the world stays, the more everything becomes a choice, that people are saying like, oh, wait, like, especially more northern countries, this may make less sense in Italy. People are like, oh, wait, like the family, my parents, that's the one thing that I cannot unchoose, and they cannot unchoose me. You know, that's like one last rigid bond. Like, you can't unchoose your children, or your children can't, I mean, it happens on exception, but they can't unchoose you, you know, they can't divorce you in a way. So it's one thing which is stable in this world of choice, selection, and options, you know. I don't know if that is helpful for your question, but that's the thoughts I had on that.
Thank you. I got a microphone, but also responsibility with it, because now it's 7, and we have a human relationship with our public. So I would like to give my time, if some minutes are still left, to anyone.
Buonasera. Compongo la domanda in italiano per essere il più precisa possibile. Ho una domanda riguardo alle constructed situation e soprattutto sulla differenza tra costruire delle situazioni che poi possono evolvere in un modo inaspettato e quanto invece possa essere interpretato anche a livello architettonico. Chi progetta gli spazi pubblici, importante creare le situazioni che permettono invece di costruire qualcosa. Cioè provare a immaginare o creare le circostanze per cui una situazione possa evolvere. Se c'è una differenza in questo senso tra l'orchestrare dei movimenti che portano poi all'evolversi di una situazione, a uno sguardo, a un discorso, a uno scambio di emozioni o un canto, e quanto invece la libertà della progettazione dello spazio possa portare alla costruzione di queste situazioni. È un po' complessa la domanda.
Yeah, I think now I understood it, yeah, but you can correct me if it's the answer to the wrong question. No, no. I think that yes, architecture or formats try to create certain social relations, you know. So for example, my personal experience with that is the theater. Like sometimes we do something in a theater, very rarely, but the theater presupposes in its built environment, like most theaters, you cannot take the seats away. So it presupposes a certain frontality, like you are looking at us now. It's very much a theater situation. Or it also presupposes a collective body, like when Gianmaria says the public, with our public, in exhibitions, for example, we say the visitors, which is different because they're more individualized. You know, the exhibition is the first ritual for individuals, whereas like theater is still like the church and like most other rituals in other cultures, it's a collective thing, you know? So it's true that architecture produces certain human relations, but only to a certain degree. You can always still, depending on the architecture, you can still undo this. So, or you can, this is a bit situationist, you can use it in a different way, you know, like, or you can, mostly architecture gives a lot of space, I think, how something can be used. But some architecture is better than others, or like I was like, or more suitable for certain activities than for others. And so it goes back a little bit to what we were discussing before in terms of the city, because that's the topic of this conference, you know, like that the city is very much built on this moving through and not on this arriving. But like if you, in Italy, you still have this idea of the square and you still have this culture of the square. Like people still hang, like if you go to a small Italian village, I'm always fascinated with the, often the men, then you can explain to me why it's often men going back and forth, and there's meeting and doing, yeah, walking back and forth. So they're, in a way, they're arriving. They're not going anywhere. They're walking back and forth, but they're arriving. So a square is more of a place of arrival. And here in Italy, you have a culture of arrival. If you go to Los Angeles, but also to the Middle East, no squares. Yeah, so very difficult to create a moment of arrival, you know, like if you want to create a moment of arrival in Los Angeles will be much more difficult than to create one in Pisa or something, you know. And then if you go to the Middle East or something, can even be more confusing, you know. Cultures which have a very much a private culture, you know. So it's true that architecture wants to create situations, but I would say only to a certain degree. Mostly architecture also is specific to a certain degree, but also unspecific, you know. My background, like as a teenager, something which really shaped me is skateboarding. So like, skateboarding is something of using using architecture in a way which was not intended. So I was in street skateboarding, so for me it was a normal thing to think like this is this structure, but how can I use it, you know? So I think in a way, like if you look at my art, this was not conscious, but I looked at the art world like a piece of architecture and I just used it in a different way, but it worked. Otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here. You wouldn't be writing a thesis. No, you know, but I don't, does that answer your question? Was that the question?
Yeah, but you construct situations, and how is the difference to construct a situation or create the possibility to create something and to be possible to build a situation?
Well, I think that, like what I was saying, maybe this is not an answer because I'm not fully sure I understand your question, but like I can try to answer like what Gianmaria was saying, what I was saying to Gianmaria before, like this situation is already constructed by convention. So like even for my work, what I do technically is that I add a few rules to the existing rules. So that's the rules of conventions and there's the rules of Tino, right? And then something that I also sometimes do is that I take one rule of the convention away. For example, in this association, like people come, they tell you something from their life, they leave. In everyday life, there's a rule which we suspend, which is like you say hello, you introduce yourself, you don't tell something deep about your life immediately. Like all these rules, like, and this is what we do in rehearsal, we kind of crossed out. Sometimes not easy, but for this moment, people accept that we cross out this rule. You don't say goodbye, which is also, people I think don't follow always, yeah? You know, so this is my work, to add a few rules and to take a few away. Yeah, but there's also some I couldn't take away, you know, like you keep a certain distance to a person, you know, like if I would say, go 1 centimeter to the person, you know, like they would say, no, 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 I'm not doing that, you know, like, but some you can alter a little bit and, you know, that one with the proximity, I wouldn't want to. So this is the technique or the craft or the process. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, may I ask you a last question? Maybe there are other questions from the public. So moving from the past to the future, what do you think that should be the role both of art and culture and of art and cultural institution in your ideal city of the future? I know it's 2 different questions.
I mean, I think that the real, let's say, challenge and task for like institutions of the future in cities is somehow to be open for as many people as possible in an embodied way whilst producing connectivity. So there's 3 things which don't necessarily go together. So like open to as many people as possible, that's a democratic institution. Like the museum is more open than the theater. I mean, more people can go to a museum at any moment or to an exhibition. So open to all. Embodied to me is a word which means in real life, no? Like 4 dimensions or 3 dimensions, whatever you want to call it. So it means not, embodied means not screen. Because on the screen, it's very easy to create an open, the internet is a very open field, but it's not embodied. And it produces connections, but maybe not connectivity or something like that. So like they should be open to all, embodied, and have techniques of connection. But it's almost like an impossible task. Like there was an attempt in the 60s, which wasn't realized, was the Fun Palace by Cedric Price, which was trying to bring these 3 elements together, you know, like was a place should come 40,000 people per day. It's because of called the Fun Palace, like it was like people should experiment, kind of be creative themselves. And of course, they're there with their bodies. They're not like just playing Fortnite, you know, with 16 million other people at the same time, you know. So yeah. No, does that answer your question?
It did, absolutely. Yeah, more on cultural institutions than on art and culture, but maybe
But cultural institutions and art for me is the same thing, because art has the way we understand it, like let's say, it's a longer conversation, but my understanding of art, let's say with a big A, like art, like Francesco Bonami would write a book about it, not like painting like is on the wall here. You understand? Yeah, like art, it only exists through cultural institutions designating it or creating a space for it, you know? Like in my understanding, painting, sculpture, dancing, singing, they exist since the beginning of humankind, but art only exists since like museums exist, you know, like in this autonomous sense. So for me, if I think about art, I think about cultural institutions, or to me, the word art is also not so important. At the end of the day, for me, it's just a way that Western societies denominate their individualized rituals. It's just a ritual form based on a very particular regional ritual form based on individuals and objects. And, you know, and then it's a bit of a fuzzy word, art, because somehow this would also be art. But let's say, I don't know, like arte povera work would also be art, you know, but they're quite different in the way they exist in the world. So for me, cultural institutions or rituals, because cultural institutions are the institutions which create rituals, you know, even if they don't call it like that in the West, it's nonetheless what's happening, kind of secular ritual. And so that's for me what's relevant.
Thank you. I think we have time just for last couple of questions. There are 2 here. Okay. In Italiano or in English, as you like.
In the English, 2 words I would like to know is what is your point of view on the relationship between men and women in this period, in our age, the sentimental or emotive bondage. Thank you.
Prendiamo anche l'altra domanda.
I was curious about what kind of work would you do in a small Italian city from the past? Would you still feel the need to do the same kind of things, or would it be something different?
2 very good questions. Let's see if I can give answers which are good as your questions. I think with the relationship with man and woman, I think there's a positive development, is that especially women understand, like in the Western societies, that they have a masculine aspect. And that this masculine aspect, like in a Jungian sense, you know, like animus and anima, everybody, or also in a, like in most religions or most spiritual traditions, they know that every human being has a feminine side and a masculine side. So you can see, let's say, the women's movement in the West as a way to kind of exercise their masculine part, which is also has a troubling aspect because they're wanting to exercise their masculine part more in a very masculine world. So that's the troubling part, but I think spiritually it's a good thing, you know? The problem is that like in the discourses, like the discourses, to say it shortly, are not Jungian enough. So the discourses, we have men and women, but there's not such a big difference. Like, and this I also, I think Italy, again, this is one of the reasons why I like to come to Italy, because Italian man, like there is a femininity in a traditional, in Italian man, from a German or English perspective. Like Italian men know how to dress well, you know, they have certain elegance, certain gentleman-like quality, you know. But I think that there's positive developments in the sense of that, like women understanding their masculine part, men are not necessarily understanding their feminine part. So I think there needs to be emancipatory movement, if one uses this word, which is troubling, emancipation, no, like because it's that men understand and can live. Also, society allows them to live their more feminine part, and I think so. On the one hand, we have this movement of integrating your anima, your animus, to say it in these Jungian terms. On the other hand, we have the discourses see it like you have to be either a man or woman. If you're not comfortable, you have to become the other one. Like there's a lot of confusion there, I think. Your question was short and good. My answer was long, but it was an attempt. Yeah. And then about Italian village of the past, my first intuition is like I wouldn't do a work there because maybe they wouldn't need my work, you know. But then I would go through my work and see which one could work. Yeah, so maybe one or two could work. Yeah.
But would you still be an artist? Would there be a room for an artist?
I mean, in the Italian city of the past, no, there were no artists. There were craftspeople, no?
Okay, so you would be a craftsman.
And there was no craft for choreography or something, no? Like this was a specialization which came later, no? Like there were craft maybe for painting, but choreography was social dancing. You could be a good dancer, but you couldn't be like a professional in choreography, no? Like, I don't think that existed.
Okay, I think time is finished. So thank you very much, Tino. Grazie Giovanni, Gianmaria, grazie a voi per la presenza e buon weekend a tutti. Arrivederci.